A young woman, burdened by debt and her brother's illness, signs a life-altering contract to marry a billionaire stranger. What begins as a cold transaction unravels into a journey of unexpected connection. Before diving into this emotional tale, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and rate this heartfelt story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the journey. The air in the cramped apartment was thick with the scent of damp plaster and desperation. Yara Nkosi sat at the wobbly kitchen table, her trembling fingers clutching a pen that felt heavier than it should. Before her lay a stack of legal documents, their crisp pages stark against the peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceiling. At 23, she was about to sign away her life to a man she'd never met. A billionaire who held the power to pull her family from the jaws of crushing debt and save her little brother, Kofi, from the illness threatening to steal him away. The words on the page blurred as tears welled in her eyes, each clause a chain binding her to an uncertain future. 1 year of marriage to Gabriel Sterling, a tech mogul whose name dominated headlines but whose face she knew only from glossy magazine covers. In exchange, her family's debts would vanish, Kofi's treatment would be funded, and she'd walk away with enough money to start anew, if she fulfilled every condition. Across the table, the lawyer, a wiry man with a pinched face, cleared his throat, his impatience slicing through the silence. Behind him stood a tall woman in a tailored suit, her sharp features framed by a severe bun. She'd introduced herself as Ms. Porter, Gabriel Sterling's assistant, but her cold, unblinking gaze made Yara feel like a specimen under a microscope. Ms. Porter's eyes flicked over Yara's faded sweater, her chipped nail polish, her hesitant grip on the pen, as if cataloging every flaw. "If you're having second thoughts, Ms. Nkosi," Ms. Porter said, her voice clipped as she glanced at her sleek wristwatch, "Mr. Sterling has other candidates ready to accept his offer. The $50,000 deposit will be withdrawn if you don't sign today." The words landed like a guillotine. $50,000 already sat in her mother's bank account, a lifeline promised to the hospital to begin Kofi's treatment. There was no turning back now. Yara's throat tightened. "I'll sign," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The pen scratched across the paper, each stroke a surrender. But a question burned in her chest, refusing to be silenced. "Why me?" she asked, lifting her gaze to meet Ms. Porter's. "He could have anyone." The assistant's lips curved into a thin, mirthless smile. "Mr. Sterling has his reasons. You fit his requirements. That's all you need to know. Requirements." The word echoed like a job listing, cold and transactional. And in a way, it was. Yara wasn't being courted. She was being hired. Hired to be the wife of a man who needed someone obedient, grateful, and desperate enough to comply without question. Someone exactly like her. The lawyer gathered the papers with brisk efficiency, not giving her a moment to linger on the fine print she'd just bound herself to. 1 year of marriage, 1 year of being Gabriel Sterling's wife in every sense. Public, private, performative. The contract was clear on some points. She'd attend events as his arm candy, live in his home, and uphold the image of a devoted spouse. But other sections, vague references to wifely duties and maintaining the appearance of a loving marriage, twisted her stomach with dread. What kind of man bought a wife? What did he expect from a woman who had nothing to offer but her presence? "Welcome to the Sterling family, Mrs. Sterling," Ms. Porter said, her tone devoid of warmth, as if reciting a script. "The car will collect you tomorrow at 8 a.m. Pack lightly. Mr. Sterling provides everything his wife needs." The words hung in the air, a promise and a warning. Yara nodded, her throat too tight to respond. When they left, the apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in. She wandered to Kofi's room, where her 10-year-old brother slept, his small frame curled under a thin blanket. For the first time in months, His face was peaceful, the pain medication finally working now that they could afford it. She knelt beside him, brushing a kiss across his forehead. "I'm doing this for you," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Just 1 year. I can do anything for 1 year." Sleep eluded her that night. Her mind churned with questions about Gabriel Sterling. Was he cruel, calculating, lonely? Why would a man with his wealth and power choose her, a diner waitress with nothing but determination and a sick brother? The contract's ambiguity gnawed at her, each unclear clause a shadow of what might be demanded. She stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks that mirrored her fractured hopes, until dawn crept through the window. The next morning, a sleek black car arrived precisely at 8 a.m., its polished surface gleaming like a warning. Yara hugged her mother, whose tears soaked her shoulder. "He must be a good man to help us like this," her mother said, her voice trembling with forced optimism. Yara forced a smile. "Yes, I'm sure he is." It was a lie, but it was easier than the truth. She climbed into the car, the leather seats cold against her skin, and watched her old life shrink in the rearview mirror as they drove away. The journey took nearly 2 hours, the city's familiar chaos giving way to sprawling estates and manicured landscapes. When they passed through towering iron gates and up a winding driveway, Yara's breath caught. The mansion loomed ahead, a fortress of gray stone with countless windows that stared down like unblinking eyes. It was grand, imposing and utterly unwelcoming under the heavy clouds above. Ms. Porter met her at the entrance, her expression as frigid as the day before. "Mr. Sterling is away on business. He'll return this evening for dinner, where you'll be introduced. For now, I'll show you to your rooms and review the rules." Rules. The word settled like a weight in Yara's chest. She followed Ms. Porter through marble hallways, lined with artwork that likely cost more than her entire neighborhood. Her rooms were a suite larger than her family's apartment, complete with a bedroom, sitting area, bathroom, and a walk-in closet already filled with clothes in her size. "How does he know my size?" Yara asked, her fingers grazing a silk dress that screamed wealth. Ms. Porter's response was curt. "Mr. Sterling is thorough in his research. Everything has been prepared based on the information we gathered." The idea that this stranger had dissected her life, her measurements, her circumstances, sent a chill down her spine. But she bit back her unease. Kofi's life depended on her compliance. Ms. Porter handed her a tablet. "These are the house rules and your daily schedule. Mr. Sterling expects them to follow precisely. Your first appointment is in 1 hour with the stylist. You'll be properly prepared before meeting him tonight." Properly prepared, as if she were a dish being plated for his approval. When Ms. Porter left, Yara sank onto the edge of the massive bed, the plush mattress foreign beneath her. Tears came then, hot and unstoppable, as the reality of her choice crashed over her. 1 year to save her brother. 1 year in a gilded cage with a man who saw her as a contract, not a person. But as she wiped her eyes, a spark of resolve flickered within her. She'd signed the papers. She'd made her choice. And tomorrow she'd meet the man who held her future in his hands. The tears had barely dried on Yara's cheeks when a sharp knock echoed through the suite, jolting her from the edge of the bed. She wiped her face hastily, glancing at the ornate clock on the wall. Exactly 1 hour had passed since Ms. Porter's departure. Time moved with merciless precision here, as if the mansion itself were a machine programmed to Gabriel Sterling's exacting standards. She opened the door to find a thin man with a flamboyant scarf draped around his neck, his eyes already scanning her, like a sculptor appraising raw clay. "Bonjour, Mrs. Sterling," he said with an accent she couldn't quite place, though it carried a hint of theatrical flair. "I am Henri, your stylist. We have much to do if you are to meet Mr. Sterling's expectations this evening." Yara stepped aside, allowing him entry, her heart pounding. Henri circled her slowly, his narrowed eyes taking in every detail. Her unruly curls, her unmanicured nails, the subtle lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes from sleepless nights at Kofi's bedside. He clicked his tongue disapprovingly, a sound that made her flinch. So much potential, yet so much work, he sighed dramatically, gesturing for her to sit at the vanity mirror. Mr. Sterling was very specific about how he wants you to look. We must polish this diamond until it shines. As he began his ritual, plucking, waxing, scrubbing, Yara endured it all in silence, her body a canvas being reshaped for someone else's vision. The hot wax stung her skin, the tweezers pinched, and the creams smelled of exotic flowers she couldn't name, but she bit her lip and held still. This was part of the bargain, she reminded herself. If transforming into a stranger in the mirror meant Kofi's survival, she'd bear it. 3 grueling hours later, Henry stepped back, declaring her acceptable with a flourish. Yara stared at her reflection, stunned. Her dark skin glowed under the expert application of oils and powders. Her curls tamed into elegant waves that framed her face like a crown. Her nails were now flawless ovals in a neutral sheen, and the black dress he'd selected clung to her curves with understated grace, its fabric whispering luxury with every movement. It fit perfectly, another chilling reminder that Gabriel had been studying her, long before she knew of his existence. Mr. Sterling prefers subtle elegance for first impressions, Henry explained, adjusting a stray lock. Nothing too bold yet. The word yet hung in the air like a veiled threat, but Yara pushed it aside. She barely recognized the woman staring back, poised, polished, a far cry from the weary waitress who'd signed her life away. As Henry packed his tools, Ms. Porter returned precisely at 7, her watch seemingly dictating the rhythm of the household. "It's time," she said sharply, leading Yara down the echoing hallways. The mansion's opulence pressed in from all sides, crystal chandeliers casting fractured light, paintings of stern ancestors watching her passage. "Remember," Ms. Porter instructed as they walked, "Mr. Sterling values good posture, intelligent conversation, and above all, discretion. No personal questions. No mention of your family beyond appropriate gratitude. Do not touch him unless he initiates." The rules piled on like invisible shackles, each one tightening Yara's resolve while fueling her anxiety. What kind of marriage required such rigid boundaries? The dining room loomed ahead, an intimidating cavern with a soaring ceiling and a massive table that could seat an army, but was set intimately, for 2 at one end. Ms. Porter positioned Yara in a chair and vanished with a curt nod. "Mr. Sterling will arrive shortly. Stand when he enters." Alone, Yara's heart thundered in her ears. The room's grandeur mocked her, the crystal chandelier above twinkling like distant stars she could never reach. Footsteps approached, deliberate and measured, echoing like a countdown. She stood, her legs unsteady beneath the elegant dress. The door swung open, and there he was, Gabriel Sterling. Photographs hadn't captured his full presence. The towering height, the golden hair swept back with precision, the dark eyes that locked onto her with an intensity that pierced straight through. He was 38, she knew from the dossiers, but he carried himself with the timeless authority of someone who bent the world to his will. No smile softened his features as he approached, his gaze appraising her much like Henri's, but deeper, as if stripping away layers to her very core. "Mrs. Sterling," he said at last, his deep voice surprisingly soft, like velvet over steel. "Welcome to your new home." The words were formal, but they carried the weight of possession. Yara swallowed hard. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," she replied, the rehearsed line sounding stiff even to her. "Gabriel," he corrected smoothly. "In private, you'll call me Gabriel. In public, you may use terms of endearment as appropriate to maintain our image." He gestured for her to sit, taking his seat as a silent server appeared to pour wine, vanishing as quickly as he'd come. The ritual felt scripted, every movement choreographed. "I'm sure you have questions," Gabriel continued, his eyes never leaving her face. "You may ask them now, in private. Once we begin public appearances, there will be no room for confusion or mistakes." The invitation caught her off guard, a small crack in his armored facade. She took a sip of wine to steady her nerves, the rich liquid warming her throat. "Why me?" she asked, echoing the question that had haunted her since the contract. "You could have chosen anyone." His expression remained impassive, a mask of control. "I required someone with specific qualities, someone with strong motivation to fulfill the contract completely, someone without connections to my social circle, someone intelligent enough to learn quickly, but not ambitious enough to have her agenda." The assessment stung like a slap, though it rang true. Her desperation had made her pliable, controllable, a perfect fit for his needs. "And what exactly do you expect from me?" she pressed, proud that her voice held steady. He leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the space between them. "I expect you to be the perfect wife in public, supportive, charming, devoted. I expect you to learn quickly and not embarrass me. I expect you to follow the rules and schedules provided." He paused, taking a measured sip of his wine. "In private, I expect you to respect my space and privacy. Your needs will be met generously, but this is a business arrangement, not a fairy tale." Her cheeks warmed as she gathered the courage for the next question, the one that had kept her awake. "The contract mentioned wifely duties." For the first time, a flicker crossed his features. Amusement, perhaps, or something darker. "You're concerned about the physical aspects." It wasn't a question, but she nodded. "The clause exists to maintain the marriage's legal validity," he explained coolly. "However, I have no interest in unwilling partners. That aspect will develop if and when there's mutual interest. Until then, separate bedrooms." Relief washed over her, though she masked it carefully. At least that boundary was clear, for now. "Do you have other questions?" he prompted, as the server returned with the first course, a delicate arrangement of seafood she barely registered. She had dozens, but his patience seemed finite. "Will I be allowed to see my family?" "Scheduled visits twice a month for the first 6 months," he replied, without hesitation. "If you adapt well, more frequent ones may be arranged afterward." His tone suggested this was generous, a concession from his world of absolute control. "Your brother's treatment will continue as stipulated, regardless." With that, he was gone, leaving Yara alone in the opulent room, the weight of his words lingering like a challenge. Opportunity? It felt more like a labyrinth, each turn leading deeper into his world. As Ms. Porter arrived to escort her back, Yara couldn't shake the intensity of his gaze or the subtle undercurrents in his voice. Tomorrow's dinner loomed, a test she couldn't afford to fail. For Kofi's sake, she'd play her part perfectly, even if it meant losing a piece of herself in the process. The weight of Gabriel's parting words lingered through the night, turning Yara's dreams into a labyrinth of shadowed expectations and whispered rules. She woke to a knock at her door, the curtains already drawn back to flood the suite with morning light. A young woman in a crisp uniform stood by the window, her smile professional but distant. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling. I'm Lisa, your assistant. It's 7:30, and your day begins at 8 hours, with breakfast on the terrace." Yara blinked, disoriented by the intrusion. "My assistant? I don't need—" Lisa interrupted politely, yet firmly. "Mr. Sterling insists. Your schedule today includes etiquette training at 9 hours, wardrobe consultation at 11, lunch at 1, followed by briefings on tonight's dinner guests. Your outfit for the evening has already been selected." The revelation hit Yara like a cold wave. Every minute of her existence here was orchestrated, a symphony conducted by Gabriel's unseen hand. Does he plan every breath I take? She wondered. But Lisa's expression brooked no argument. The schedule is designed to prepare you for your role. Mr. Sterling believes in thorough preparation. Yara dressed quickly, the silk robe from the closet feeling like borrowed skin, and followed Lisa to the terrace. The view was breathtaking, rolling gardens stretching toward a distant horizon, but it did little to ease the knot in her stomach. Breakfast was a solitary affair, a spread of fresh fruits, pastries, and coffee that mocked her lack of appetite. As she ate, her thoughts drifted to Kofi, wondering if his treatment had started, if he was thinking of her. But there was no time for sentiment. The day demanded performance. The afternoon briefing was even more overwhelming, a deluge of information orchestrated by Ms. Porter in a sunlit study lined with leather-bound books. Files on each guest appeared on the tablet. Photographs, biographies, business ties to Gabriel, and scripted conversation topics. Mr. Harrington is passionate about sailing but sensitive about his recent divorce, Ms. Porter recited, her voice a monotone drill. Mrs. Chen collects antique jade, but dislikes discussing her son's academic troubles. Senator Williams appreciates fine whiskey, but never touches on pending legislation at social gatherings. The details piled on, a web of facts Yara struggled to memorize. What if she slipped, forgot a name, or broached a forbidden topic? What happens if I make a mistake? She finally interrupted, her voice edged with anxiety. Ms. Porter's lips thinned. Mr. Sterling does not tolerate public errors. The contract includes penalties for failing to maintain the expected image. Penalties, of course. In this world, every misstep carried a cost, every action a consequence. At 6, the preparations intensified. Henri returned for final touches on her hair and makeup, transforming her into a vision of refined elegance. Lisa laid out an emerald green dress that hugged her figure like a second skin, paired with diamonds from the family collection. Stones, reset just for her, cold and heavy against her skin like additional chains. These are heirlooms, Lisa explained, fastening a bracelet. Mr. Sterling had them adjusted specifically. Yara stared at her reflection, the woman in the mirror a stranger, poised, glamorous, but hollow-eyed with nerves. At 7:30 sharp, Lisa escorted her to the grand staircase, where Gabriel waited in a tailored dark suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and golden hair. His gaze swept over her with clinical precision, lingering just long enough to make her pulse race. "The dress suits you," he said finally, not a compliment, but an approval of his investment. "Thank you," Yara replied, maintaining eye contact as Mrs. Winters had drilled. He offered his arm, a gesture both chivalrous and possessive. "The first guests are arriving. Remember, we met last year at a charity gala. Whirlwind romance, quiet wedding last month. Just back from our honeymoon in the Maldives." The fabricated story rolled off his tongue effortlessly, a lie polished to perfection. Yara took his arm, feeling the solid warmth beneath the fabric, a fleeting comfort she quickly dismissed. He was no ally. He was the architect of her cage. The evening unfolded in a haze of introductions and small talk, the dining room now alive with laughter and clinking glasses. Yara smiled until her cheeks ached, navigating conversations with the precision of a tightrope walker. She discussed sailing with Mr. Harrington, avoiding his divorce, admired Mrs. Chen's jade without prying into family matters, shared a light anecdote about whiskey with the senator, steering clear of politics. Gabriel kept her close, his hand often at the small of her back, a touch that looked affectionate but felt like guidance, a subtle reminder of her role. He introduced her with practiced pride, deflecting questions about their swift marriage with romantic platitudes. "When you find the one, why wait?" The guests bought it, their envy and curiosity palpable. To Yara's surprise, she found moments of genuine interest. Mrs. Chen's stories of ancient artifacts sparked a curiosity she hadn't felt in years. But the performance was exhausting. Every word weighed for potential pitfalls. As the last guest departed shortly before midnight, Yara exhaled in relief, her body aching from the tension. Gabriel closed the door behind them, turning to her with his usual unreadable expression. "You did well," he said simply. "Better than expected for your first appearance." The praise, sparse as it was, ignited a flicker of pride in her chest. "Thank you. I tried to remember everything Ms. Porter told me." "You did more than recite facts," he observed, studying her intently. "You connected with them. That's a skill that can't be taught." For a moment, the mask slipped, revealing something almost appreciative in his eyes. "I've always been good with people," she admitted. "At the diner, regulars requested my section." A shadow crossed his face, fleeting but unmistakable. "That's precisely why you were selected. Your natural abilities just needed refinement." The reminder that she was chosen like a product doused her momentary satisfaction. "If you'll excuse me," she said, suddenly bone-weary. "It's been a long day." He nodded, but as she turned toward the stairs, he called her name. "Yara." She paused, glancing back. "Tomorrow, we attend the Hamilton Foundation Gala, your first major public event. Press, photographers, influential eyes on us." His tone carried a note of warning, the stakes unspoken but clear. "I understand," she replied, though anxiety twisted in her gut. As she climbed the staircase, the diamonds heavy on her wrist, Yara realized survival here meant mastering not just the rules, but the art of illusion. And with the gala looming, the real test was just beginning. The echo of Gabriel's warning about the Hamilton Foundation Gala haunted Yara through another restless night, her mind replaying the subtle tension in his voice like a foreboding melody. Morning arrived with its relentless schedule. Lisa appearing at her door with a tray of breakfast and a garment bag containing the evening's armor, a shimmering gown in midnight blue that promised to turn heads while concealing her vulnerabilities. As Henry worked his magic once more, styling her hair into cascading waves and applying makeup that accentuated her features without overpowering them, Yara practiced her serene smile in the mirror. Hours of etiquette drills blurred into wardrobe fittings and last-minute briefings from Ms. Porter, who drilled her on potential guests, media pitfalls, and the fabricated backstory of their whirlwind romance. "The press will be voracious," Ms. Porter warned, her eyes like flint. "One wrong word, and the illusion crumbles." Yara nodded, her resolve hardening. If last night's dinner was a rehearsal, tonight was the premiere, and failure wasn't an option. Inside the grand ballroom, the scrutiny intensified. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over clusters of elite guests, women in designer gowns appraising Yara with curious, sometimes venomous stares, men eyeing Gabriel with mixtures of envy and opportunism. The air hummed with whispered speculations. Who was this mysterious new wife plucked from obscurity? Yara moved through the crowd on Gabriel's arm, repeating variations of polite deflections. "We're just thrilled to be here," or "It's all happened so fast, but when you know, you know." A rotund man with a booming laugh approached first, champagne sloshing in his glass. "Gabriel, you sly fox! Kept this beauty hidden away, eh?" Gabriel's smile was practiced, not reaching his eyes. "Harold, meet my wife, Yara Sterling." Harold grasped her hand too tightly, his eyes lingering. "The pictures don't do you justice, my dear. How did you snag the city's most eligible bachelor? Half the women here have been scheming for years." Gabriel tensed beside her, but Yara held her ground, her voice smooth. "I suppose I'm just lucky, though I consider myself the fortunate one." The interactions multiplied, each a minefield of subtle probes, designed to unearth cracks in their story. Yara navigated them with growing confidence, drawing on the briefings to charm without revealing. But then came Victoria, a tall woman in a striking red dress that commanded attention, approaching with the grace of a predator. She air-kissed Gabriel's cheek with familiar ease. "Gabriel, darling, I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." His response was cool. "Victoria, you remember I mentioned my wife, Yara?" Victoria's eyes narrowed as she assessed Yara head to toe, her smile razor-sharp. "Of course, the new Mrs. Sterling. Such a surprise to us all." Before Yara could reply, Gabriel interjected smoothly. "Yara and I are looking forward to creating our own stories now." His arm tightened around her waist, steering them away. "Ex-girlfriend," Yara whispered once out of earshot. Gabriel's jaw clenched. Nothing significant. But the edge in his tone suggested otherwise. The evening pressed on, a whirlwind of toasts and networking. When the orchestra struck up a waltz, Gabriel led her to the dance floor without a word, his hand firm at her waist. Hundreds of eyes followed as they moved in graceful synchrony, the steps she'd hastily learned the day before now instinctive under his guidance. "You're doing very well," he murmured, his breath stirring her hair. "Everyone is convinced." For a fleeting moment, encircled in his arms with his intense gaze holding hers, Yara almost believed the charade herself, the devoted couple lost in each other. "Convinced of what?" she asked softly, forgetting the performance. "That you're madly in love with me," he replied, his voice low and laced with unexpected depth. "And perhaps that I'm equally enamored with you." The words hung between them, blurring the line between act and reality, until she recalled the contract's cold terms. "Isn't that what you're paying me for?" she whispered, an edge creeping in despite her smile. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe even a hint of regret, before the mask returned. "Indeed, and you're earning every penny tonight." The dance ended to polite applause, but the intimacy shattered like glass. Later, as Gabriel conversed with a business associate, Victoria cornered Yara alone by a champagne fountain. "Enjoying your new life?" she purred, her smile not reaching her icy eyes. "It must be quite the adjustment." Yara straightened. "It's wonderful," Victoria laughed softly, a sound like breaking ice. "Oh, I'm sure it seems that way now. The clothes, the jewelry, the mansion. But I wonder how long before you realize what you've really signed up for." Yara held her ground. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Gabriel doesn't do relationships, dear. He does acquisitions." Victoria sipped her drink delicately. "I'm just curious which category you fall into." Drawing on Ms. Porter's advice, Yara replied evenly. "My relationship with my husband is private." Victoria's amusement deepened. "Husband, so formal. Though that suits Gabriel perfectly. Everything by the book, controlled to the last detail. Has he given you the rule book yet? Does he time your responses, or are you still in the honeymoon phase where he pretends you have choices?" "Of course." It was about protecting his assets, not her. "I won't tell her anything," Yara said quietly. "I signed the contract. I keep my promises." He studied her for a long moment before nodding. "I believe you do. It's one of the qualities that made you suitable." Suitable. Like a well-fitted glove. When they arrived at the mansion, Gabriel surprised her by escorting her to her suite, rather than vanishing into his office. At the door, he hesitated. "You exceeded expectations tonight. Everyone believed we were genuine." The praise warmed her, despite herself. "Thank you. I'm trying my best." "I know." For a brief instant, warmth softened his eyes. "Good night, Yara." As she closed the door, the evening's complexities swirled in her mind. The thrill of the performance, the sting of Victoria's barbs, the fleeting intimacy on the dance floor. Dangerous thoughts, she warned herself, removing the diamonds and gown. This was temporary, a business deal. Yet as sleep claimed her dreams lingered on Gabriel's gaze, hinting at depths beneath his controlled exterior. Depths she might uncover if she dared explore further. The gala's afterglow faded into routine over the following 3 weeks, but Gabriel's enigmatic gaze lingered in Yara's thoughts, like an unfinished brushstroke. Mornings dissolved into lessons, languages to navigate elite conversations, art appreciation to feign sophistication, current events to avoid embarrassing silences at his side. Afternoons brought charity meetings or supervised outings with Lisa, where every purchase was vetted for appropriateness. Evenings demanded performances at dinners or events, her role as the devoted wife honed to perfection. Yet, in rare stolen moments alone, Yara wandered the mansion's vast halls, feeling like an intruder in a museum of someone else's life. The staff observed her with polite detachment, unsure if she was a permanent fixture or a fleeting exhibit. Today, with Gabriel away on business and no obligations pinning her down, an unexpected pocket of freedom opened. After confirming with Ms. Porter that her schedule was clear, Yara ventured into the East Wing, a section she'd glimpsed but never explored, its corridors whispering of neglected histories. The air grew warmer here, less sterile than the main areas, with sunlight filtering through tall windows onto landscapes and portraits that lined the walls, stern ancestors gazing down as if judging her intrusion. Unlike the formal grandeur elsewhere, this wing felt lived in, with cozy seating nooks and bookshelves groaning under well-thumbed volumes. Curiosity pulled her forward, overriding the inner voice, cautioning against invading Gabriel's prized privacy. At the hallway's end, a door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out like an invitation. She hesitated, her hand hovering, but the pull was irresistible. Pushing it open revealed a revelation: a bright, airy studio bathed in natural light from garden-facing windows. Easels dotted the space, some bearing blank canvases, others mid-creation bursts of color. Walls displayed finished works, vibrant landscapes alive with emotion, abstract swirls that evoke turmoil, and detailed still lifes capturing fleeting beauty. A startled voice shattered the tranquility. "Mrs. Sterling?" Yara whirled to see a middle-aged man in paint-spattered clothes rising from a corner stool, brush in hand. "I'm sorry," she stammered, heat rising to her cheeks. "I was just exploring. The door was open." "I didn't mean to intrude." He set down his brush, wiping hands on a rag with a gentle smile. "No intrusion at all. I'm Robert Chambers, the house art instructor, though I wasn't expecting company today." Art instructor? The concept puzzled her. There must be a mistake. "I don't have art lessons scheduled." Robert's brow furrowed briefly. "Not yours, Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Sterling's." The words hung, reshaping her perception like a canvas flipped upside down. Gabriel, the epitome of control and calculation, took art lessons. "He paints?" Robert nodded, his expression shifting to cautious warmth. "For nearly 5 years now, twice a week when he's in residence. I assumed you knew." Drawn deeper into the room, Yara approached the walls, her eyes feasting on the pieces. "These are his?" "Most of them," Robert confirmed, watching her closely. "He's quite talented, though he'd never admit it." She studied a sunset over jagged mountains, rendered with bold, confident strokes that pulsed with raw energy, nothing like the methodical man she'd come to know. "This doesn't seem like him," she confessed, tracing the air above the canvas. Robert chuckled softly. "Perhaps there are sides to Mr. Sterling you haven't seen yet." The idea unsettled her. In their weeks together, Gabriel had shared nothing personal, their interactions confined to her performance or business necessities. "What else does he paint?" she asked, moving along the wall. "Whatever captures his interest. He has an eye for beauty in unexpected places." Robert guided her through the evolution of Gabriel's work. from early, tentative sketches to bolder expressions. The recent pieces revealed passion she couldn't reconcile with his rigid exterior, emotion bleeding through colors, subjects whispering of hidden longings. "This is his current project," Robert said, pausing before a cloth-draped canvas. "Though I'm not sure I should." "It's fine, Robert." Gabriel's voice cut in from the doorway, startling them both. He stood there, his presence filling the threshold, tension coiling in his shoulders despite his even tone. "My wife should see it." Robert excused himself swiftly, leaving them alone amid the scents of oil paint and turpentine. Yara's pulse quickened. Had she overstepped? "I didn't know you painted," she said, breaking the awkward silence. "There are many things you don't know about me," Gabriel replied, approaching the easel. "Just as there are many I don't know about you," despite the background checks. With a swift motion, he unveiled the canvas. Yara gasped. It was her, a portrait from the Hamilton Gala, captured in an unguarded moment by a window, her gaze distant, a subtle melancholy contrasting the elegant gown and glittering surroundings. The brushwork was intimate, almost tender, revealing vulnerabilities she'd thought hidden. "You've been painting me?" The question emerged sharper than intended, laced with accusation. "You're my wife," he said simply. "And an interesting subject." She studied the image, disturbed by how he'd pierced her facade. "You've made me look sad." "Haven't you been?" His directness pierced her defenses. "I've been adjusting," she hedged. He nodded, critiquing his own work. "I've been unfair to you." The admission hung heavy. Gabriel Sterling didn't confess faults. "You've upheld your end admirably, yet I've treated you more as an employee than a partner in this unusual situation." Yara searched for words, the shift disorienting. "I have business in Paris next week," he continued, recovering the portrait. "I'd like you to accompany me, for appearances partly, but also because you've been confined here except for sanctioned events." "That wasn't my intention." The offer stunned her. "I don't have a passport." "Already handled," he replied. "Ms. Porter has the details." Of course, he left nothing to chance. "Robert mentioned your interest in the paintings," Gabriel added, pivoting. "Do you have any artistic background?" "Nothing formal," she admitted. "I used to draw as a child before life's burdens, her father's death, the debts, Kofi's illness, stole such luxuries." "Before life grew hard," he finished, perceptive in a way that unnerved her. She nodded, uncomfortable with his sudden curiosity. "Would you like lessons? Robert is excellent." "Why are you doing this?" she blurted, unable to bridge this conversation with their prior detachment. He paused, his gaze shifting from the veiled portrait to her face, comparing reality to his interpretation. "Our arrangement is unconventional, but it needn't be unpleasant. You've exceeded expectations in your role. Consider this a bonus." A bonus, like perks for a valued asset. Still transactional, yet a tentative acknowledgement of her humanity. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'd like lessons with Robert, and to see Paris." Satisfaction briefly crossed his features. "Good. We leave Monday. Ms. Porter will prepare you." As he turned to leave, Yara called after him. "Why painting? With all your resources, why this?" He halted in the doorway, back to her, silence stretching. She thought he wouldn't answer. "Control," he said at last. "In business, in life, I command every variable. But paint has its own rules. Sometimes the most intriguing results come from surrendering that control." He glanced back, thoughtful. "Perhaps that's true of other things as well." With that cryptic utterance, he departed, leaving Yara amid the canvases, her mind swirling with the portrait's revelations and his words' implications. Surrendering control, in art, or in their tangled arrangement. As shadows lengthened in the studio, she pondered the man behind the mask, wondering if Paris might unveil more layers. Paris in spring was everything Yara had ever imagined. The city hummed with the buzz of activity, cafes lining the streets, the scent of fresh croissants wafting through the air, the soft chatter of people mingling in French that sounded like music. Every corner was filled with history, art, and life. The Seine glittered under the afternoon sun, and the Eiffel Tower stood like a guardian over the city, casting its long shadow across the rooftops. It felt like a dream to Yara, a dream she never thought she would live. The flight was private, and the hotel suite was breathtaking. From the window, she could see the Eiffel Tower rising majestically against the clear blue sky. It was surreal. Just days ago, she was in the cramped, run-down apartment she shared with her family, struggling to pay bills, fighting to save her brother's life. And now, she was here, in Paris, living a life of luxury she had never imagined. "Is it everything you hoped for?" Gabriel's voice broke through her reverie. He was standing next to her, gazing out the window with his usual calm demeanor. "More," she whispered, still unable to believe how much her world had shifted in the past few weeks. "Thank you for bringing me here." Gabriel didn't respond right away. He seemed lost in thought, as if something was weighing on him. He was rarely open, always the business tycoon, always in control. But this moment felt different. The space between them, once so rigid and contractual, had softened. There were no demands, no rules to follow, just the hum of the city outside and the faint sound of the bells from a nearby church. He cleared his throat, his voice returning to its usual businesslike tone. "I have meetings until dinner, but you're free to explore the city. C'est Paris, after all." He handed her a card with the name of a private guide on it. "I've arranged for someone to show you around if you'd like." Yara nodded, but something inside her stirred. She had the whole city at her fingertips. Freedom, in a way, she had never experienced before. But at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. There were always eyes on her, whether it was the discreet team of security assigned to her or Gabriel's ever-present vigilance. It felt like she was living in a gilded cage. But not today. "I'd rather explore on my own," she said, her voice more decisive than she had felt in days. Gabriel raised an eyebrow, his gaze sharpening. "Are you sure? It's not safe." "I'll be fine," she interrupted, a quiet defiance in her tone. "I want to experience Paris like a regular person. Not as Mrs. Sterling. Not as a trophy wife." Gabriel's eyes flickered with something unreadable. He hesitated for a moment, then finally gave a nod. "All right. Just be careful." He placed a credit card in her hand. "Anything you need, just use this." Yara watched as he turned to leave, disappearing down the hallway to his office, where he would no doubt bury himself in business for the rest of the day. She stood there for a moment, the weight of her decision settling in. This was it, her chance to step outside the confines of the role she had been forced into, even if only for a few hours. The city was hers. She changed quickly, slipping into a simple but elegant dress and comfortable shoes, the sunlight catching her skin as she made her way out of the hotel. For the first time in weeks, she felt the rush of freedom, the pulse of the city. The streets were alive with tourists, locals, and the occasional street artist. Yara wandered through the crowded boulevards, lost in the sights and sounds. She visited the Louvre, where she marveled at the timeless works of art, then wandered along the Seine, letting the gentle breeze lift her spirits. But it wasn't until she found herself sitting in a small cafe near the Luxembourg Gardens that she truly felt the weight of her isolation. Sitting alone at a table, sipping her coffee, she watched Parisians go about their day, speaking in a language she had barely begun to understand, their lives a world apart from hers. The thought of Gabriel crept back into her mind. He had given her this freedom, but at what cost? What was his real agenda? Was this all just another part of his carefully constructed plan, a way to keep her entertained while he dealt with the business side of things? Or, somewhere in the maze of his well-guarded heart, was there something real, something more than just the businessman she had married? The question gnawed at her. As she walked back to the hotel later that afternoon, her mind was clouded with uncertainty. The city had given her a taste of freedom, but it also made her feel more alone than ever before. She was no longer just the desperate woman signing a contract for her brother's survival. She was someone caught between two worlds, two lives, one she had never wanted, and one that seemed just out of reach. It was then that she saw him. Gabriel stood across the street, talking to a man in a dark suit. His back was to her, but even from this distance, she could sense the tension in his posture. She froze for a moment, watching him. The man he was speaking with gestured wildly, clearly agitated. Gabriel's face was impassive, his stance controlled as always. But there was something in the air between them, something that made Yara's stomach twist with unease. She shouldn't be watching him, shouldn't be getting involved in whatever business dealings he was entangled in. But something about the scene felt wrong. Gabriel wasn't just a businessman to her anymore. He was her husband, for better or worse. And there were times when the lines between what they were and what they were supposed to be blurred. As the man stormed off, Gabriel turned and caught her gaze across the street. His expression was unreadable. He didn't smile, didn't wave. He just stood there for a moment, staring at her, as if weighing something. Something that only he could understand. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Yara stood frozen in place, the weight of his stare lingering on her skin like a brand. The questions about him, about their arrangement, about everything that had happened since that first contract had been signed, came rushing back with a force she couldn't ignore. She had no answers, but she knew, in that moment, she was no longer just the woman he had married for convenience. She had become a part of his world, whether he liked it or not. And that thought both scared and exhilarated her. As the evening set in, Gabriel returned to the hotel, and she could see the weariness in his eyes. The tension from earlier hadn't left him, but he said nothing about it. Instead, they went through the motions of dinner, small talk, and an awkward silence that seemed to stretch longer with each passing second. At the end of the night, as they prepared to part ways for the evening, Gabriel stopped her by the door. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "I'm fine," Yara replied, but her eyes didn't meet his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with a quiet, almost imperceptible sigh, Gabriel reached for her hand. "I'm glad you're here, Yara. More than you know." Yara didn't know how to respond to that. She couldn't quite bring herself to believe him. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said instead, pulling her hand gently from his grasp. As she closed the door to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that despite everything, despite the beautiful city, the grand hotel, and the wealth that surrounded them, there was still so much about Gabriel Sterling and about herself that she didn't know. And it was that uncertainty that made her heart race. The days that followed their time in Paris were quiet. Too quiet, Yara thought. The city had felt alive with possibility. But back in the cold, polished halls of Gabriel's estate, everything seemed stifled again. The routine had returned. Breakfast in silence, brief moments of forced conversation, and nights spent alone in their separate rooms. Gabriel was still away for business more than he was home, leaving her with nothing but her thoughts. Her days were spent in the same predictable pattern. Visits to Kofi, who was doing remarkably well with his treatments, followed by lessons with Robert in the art studio. Evenings were consumed by charity galas or business dinners where she was little more than a perfect accessory on his arm. She played her part, always polite, always distant, her smile never faltering. But beneath the surface, Something was shifting. The more she tried to bury the questions in her mind, the louder they became. She had thought that being in Paris would bring some clarity. But now, back in the sterile silence of the estate, Yara found herself at war with her own emotions. Gabriel had shown her parts of himself she hadn't expected. The man who painted, who was quietly kind in his own way, who held back pieces of himself like a carefully curated secret. But there were other sides, darker, more unsettling sides that Yara couldn't ignore. It was the call that came one Thursday afternoon that finally cracked the delicate shell she had created around her thoughts. Yara had just returned from a meeting with her brother's doctor when her phone buzzed, its screen lighting up with an unfamiliar name. Victoria Wood, she muttered to herself, frowning at the name. The call had been brief, but it sent a shiver down her spine. Yara, darling, Victoria's voice came through, dripping with an unsettling sweetness. I thought you might be interested in joining me for a little chat. I know you've been keeping to yourself, but sometimes a little company is good for the soul, don't you think? I'm hosting a small gathering tonight. Just drinks, nothing too formal. It would be nice to have a woman of your caliber around. The way she emphasized caliber made Yara's skin crawl. She had heard enough of Victoria's veiled insults to know that the woman had no interest in being friendly. Still, the thought of staying home alone another evening gnawed at her, and before she could stop herself, she found herself agreeing to the invitation. By the time the evening rolled around, the nerves in her stomach were gnawing away at her. Gabriel was in New York for a business deal, and the house felt too large, too empty without him. She didn't know what had driven her to accept Victoria's invitation, but there she was, standing in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the sleek black dress she had chosen. It was simple, elegant, yet carried an air of confidence that she knew Victoria would appreciate. She wasn't about to let the woman see her sweat. The car ride to Victoria's apartment was a blur. Yara's mind raced, replaying every interaction she had ever had with the woman. Victoria Wood had a reputation, a dangerous one. She was the type of woman who could manipulate anyone into believing whatever narrative she wanted. Yara knew that, but something in her kept pulling her back to the idea of confronting Victoria, of standing her ground. Victoria's penthouse was exactly what Yara had expected. Grand, extravagant, but cold in its perfection. The walls were lined with contemporary art, the furniture all sleek, chrome and glass. It was a space designed to impress, and it did. As Yara stepped inside, she was greeted by a host of strangers, all of whom were either business associates or socialites who had long ago learned the art of wearing smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The air felt thick with unspoken judgments, but Yara was used to this by now. She had learned to fake her way through these kinds of events. "Yara!" Victoria called out from across the room, her voice a sharp contrast to the murmur of the guests. "I'm so glad you could join us." Her tone was sweet, but Yara could hear the undercurrent of something else in it, something insidious. Victoria made her way over, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her smile tight and predatory. She was dressed in a stunning red dress that screamed confidence, her every movement calculated and deliberate. "Victoria," Yara replied with a smile, one that didn't quite meet her eyes. "Thank you for inviting me." Victoria leaned in close, her breath warm against Yara's ear. "I'm glad you came. I thought it might be nice to have a little chat, just the two of us. You see, I've been hearing things about Gabriel, about you." Yara tensed. "What kind of things?" Victoria's smile turned into something more sinister, her eyes glinting with something that bordered on amusement. "Oh, you know, rumors. About his past, about the women he's been with. The ones before you, of course." She leaned back, her gaze never leaving Yara's face. Sophia Harris. You've heard of her, haven't you? The name hit Yara like a slap. She had heard of Sophia Harris, the woman before her, the one who had been with Gabriel before he had entered into this arrangement with her. Yara hadn't asked about her, hadn't wanted to know. But hearing Victoria say her name made the past feel real, like something she couldn't ignore any longer. Yes, Yara said, her voice steady despite the rising anger inside her. I've heard of her. Victoria's lips curled into a smile. Well, let me tell you something, darling. She was the first, and she wasn't the last. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Gabriel doesn't do forever, Yara. He does contracts. He does business. He does deals. But he doesn't do love. Yara's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected it, felt the distance, the cool professionalism that always existed between them. But hearing it from Victoria, someone who had been on the inside, felt like a punch to the gut. I'm not interested in your gossip, Victoria, Yara replied, forcing herself to meet the woman's gaze. I'm here for one reason only, and that's because I thought it would be better than spending another night alone. Victoria's eyes narrowed, the playful facade slipping for a moment. Of course you think that. But you should know, when this contract is up, Gabriel will move on, just like he always does. You'll be another chapter in his book of women who didn't make the cut. And believe me, he doesn't keep chapters around that don't serve his purpose. Yara felt a knot form in her stomach. She wanted to shout, to tell Victoria she was wrong. But deep down, the truth gnawed at her. Gabriel had never promised her anything. There was no love, no fairy tale. He had made that clear from the start. The contract was just that, an agreement, nothing more. But there was something else, something that Victoria didn't know, something that Yara hadn't fully realized herself until that very moment. It wasn't just the contract that kept her in this marriage. It was him. Gabriel had become a part of her life, whether she liked it or not. She had started to care for him, and that terrified her. I'm not like you, Victoria, Yara said, her voice steady but firm. I'm not interested in playing games. I'm not here to be one of Gabriel's women, or to try to manipulate him into something he doesn't want. Victoria studied her for a moment, a small, amused smile playing at her lips. You're more like him than you think, Yara. You're just too proud to admit it. Yara didn't respond. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of Victoria's words, but she refused to let them control her. She wasn't going to be manipulated by anyone. Not by Victoria, not by Gabriel, not by anyone. She had made her choices. Now, it was up to her to live with them. As she turned to leave, Victoria called out after her, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. Good luck, darling. You'll need it. Yara walked out into the night, her mind racing. She didn't know what Gabriel wanted from her, and maybe he didn't know either. But she knew one thing for certain. The world she had stepped into wasn't as simple as it seemed. There were no easy answers, no fairy tale endings. And as much as she hated to admit it, she was in deeper than she ever intended. The morning after her tense encounter with Victoria, Yara sat by the window in the study, the sunlight gently streaming in through the tall windows. The estate felt unusually quiet, its grand walls and endless corridors amplifying the isolation that had settled inside her. She hadn't slept much, her mind replaying Victoria's warning over and over, as if the woman's words had found a way to embed themselves in her thoughts. Gabriel didn't do forever. He did contracts. He did business. Love was a foreign concept to him. Yara had never been naive enough to think her marriage to Gabriel was anything other than a transaction, a year-long deal where she played the role of his wife, in exchange for saving her brother and securing the future of her family. But there was more to it now. She had started to feel the weight of what was unsaid between them. The way he'd looked at her when they were alone in Paris. The way his touch lingered. The fleeting moments of tenderness that made her question whether there was something deeper, something real, lurking beneath the surface of their contract. She wasn't ready to face it yet, but she couldn't deny that she felt something for him. Something that went beyond the lines of the contract. She cared for him. She didn't know when it had happened, but it had. As she sat there, contemplating the events of the last few weeks, her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was a message from Gabriel. "I'll be home tonight. I need to speak to you. Please meet me in the library at 7. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She had been waiting for this moment, for the inevitable conversation that would either solidify or shatter whatever fragile connection they had begun to form. There were things unsaid between them, things that needed to be addressed. The thought of facing him, of hearing his truth, both terrified and exhilarated her. That evening, she found herself standing in the Grand Library, the walls lined with books that seemed to stretch endlessly into the high ceilings. The fireplace crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the room. Gabriel hadn't arrived yet, but she could already feel the tension building in the air. There was something about the stillness of the space, the quiet before the storm, that made her heart race. As the clock struck 7, the door to the library opened, and Gabriel stepped in, his tall frame filling the doorway. He looked the same as he always did, well-groomed, composed, the perfect picture of a man who had everything under control. But there was something in his eyes that told her this was different. He wasn't the same man who had signed that contract with her. There was a vulnerability there now, something she hadn't seen before. "Yara," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Thank you for meeting me." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak just yet. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "I know you've been struggling with all of this," he continued, stepping further into the room. "I've seen it in your eyes, in the way you've withdrawn, and I don't blame you. This situation, this marriage was never supposed to be easy, but I want you to know something." He paused, searching her face as if looking for some kind of reassurance. "I didn't expect any of this, Yara. I didn't expect you." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything inside her stilled. She had been waiting for him to say something like this, to admit that there was more to their arrangement than just a business transaction. But hearing it from him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, left her feeling both relieved and anxious. "I didn't expect to care," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect to want more than what we agreed upon. But here I am, asking myself, asking you what happens next." Yara's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected that there was something deeper between them, but she hadn't expected him to admit it so plainly. She had been waiting for this moment, and now that it was here, she didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to reach out, to take his hand and tell him everything she had been feeling. But the other part of her, the part that had been so determined to protect her heart, held back. "I don't know what happens next, Gabriel," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I've been asking myself the same thing. I came into this marriage thinking it was just a year, just a way to save Kofi and get out of this mess. But it's not just that anymore. I'm not just playing a role for you. I've started to feel things I never expected to feel." Gabriel's expression softened, and he stepped closer to her. "I didn't want to complicate things," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can't keep pretending I don't feel it too. I don't know what this is, Yara, but I don't want it to end when the contract does. I want more. I want us to have more." She took a step back, the weight of his words settling into her chest. "You're saying you want to break the contract?" He shook his head. "No, I'm saying I want to change the terms. I want to rewrite this. I don't want to be bound by a contract anymore. I want a future with you, one that's not based on obligations or deals. Yara stood frozen, the enormity of what he was asking hitting her all at once. She had never considered a future with Gabriel beyond the confines of their agreement. But as she looked at him now, she realized that her feelings had changed. She wanted more too. She wasn't ready to let go of this connection, this fragile thread that had woven itself between them. But the fear, the doubt, lingered. "What about the past?" she asked softly. "What about Sophia? What about all the other women before me?" Gabriel's gaze faltered for a moment, but then he met her eyes with unwavering sincerity. "I can't change the past, Yara. I can't take back the things I've done, the choices I've made. But I can choose you now. I can choose us. And I'm willing to take that risk, if you are." For the first time, Yara felt something shift inside her. The walls she had built around her heart, the defenses she had so carefully constructed, began to crumble. She had been afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of giving him more than just a year, afraid of what might happen when the contract ended. But now, as she looked at Gabriel, she realized that the only thing she was really afraid of was losing him. "I'm scared, Gabriel," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't want to walk away from this. From you." He reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "Then don't," he whispered. "Stay with me. Let's figure it out together." Yara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his touch, the warmth of his words. She had spent so much time trying to protect herself, trying to keep her heart safe. But in that moment, she realized that the only way to truly live was to take the leap, to trust him and to trust herself. When she opened her eyes, she saw the hope in his, the vulnerability that mirrored her own. And for the first time since she had signed the contract, she felt like she was making a choice that was truly her own. "I'm not walking away," she said, her voice steady. "Let's rewrite this. Let's create our own future." Gabriel's lips curved into a smile, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and softened the edges of everything around them. And as he pulled her into his arms, Yara knew that this was just the beginning. They weren't bound by the contract anymore. They were bound by something stronger, the choice to build a future together, one that was all their own. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Yara and Gabriel's story. I hope you enjoyed the twists, turns, and emotional depth as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback on the story, what resonated with you the most, or any reflections you may have. Your perspective is always appreciated. Until next time, take care, and I look forward to sharing more with you soon.